Welcome to the Water Resources Podcast. I'm your host, Bridget Scanlon, from the Bureau of Economic Geology at the University of Texas at Austin. This podcast is produced in partnership with the National Academy of Engineering. In this podcast, we discuss water challenges with leading experts. Today, I would like to welcome Petra Döll to the Water Resources Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today, Petra.
You're welcome.
Petra is a professor of hydrology at Goethe University in Frankfurt, and prior to working at the University of Frankfurt, she worked for many years also at the University of Kassel, both in Germany. Her research focuses on global hydrologic modeling, particularly the WaterGAP model, and also transdisciplinary knowledge integration and participatory research methods. And today we will cover both of those topics, her global modeling and her stakeholder engagement approaches and methodologies. She has contributed extensively to the IPCC reports and received numerous awards, including the Henry Darcy Medal from the European Geophysical Union in 2019 for her work in global freshwater system modeling. So maybe we met many years ago, Petra, when you attended a conference in Nebraska on the High Plains Aquifer. We were both attending the Water for Food conference in Nebraska. And I always appreciated how you tried to bring in process understanding and learning from different regions into your global modeling. Maybe we can start with, we're hearing a lot these days about very hot conditions around the Mediterranean parts of Europe and a drought. And maybe you can describe a little bit about what's going on in Germany these days with the drought conditions.
Yeah. So in Germany, one could say that we had now 5 years of, let's say, summer drought, but also winter drought. But the summer drought is, more visible and has a more stronger impact, particularly on our forests, but also partially on water supply. Germany is not like the Western United States. It's a humid place. So we have been used to having always plenty of water. And the problem were more floods and water quality, but not so much drought. So with our also global model, we started to work on drought. I was one of the few people in Germany being interested in drought because I was looking outside of Germany. But now, yes, we had in 2003 this very strong Central European drought, but then afterwards, everything was back to normal. And then it started in 2018 with a very strong summer drought, so starting July. And I would say in Germany, situation has not really recovered. We had a little better year in 2021. And what is visible, for example, is that now in the news, we always have the newest maps from the German drought monitor. It's a soil drought monitor, which runs every day with precipitation from 2,500 stations in Germany and then runs at the UFZ. This is a research organization, not a university, and they run their model every day and produce, so to say, drought in the uppermost 25 centimeters and down to 2 meters. And that has gained a very, very high public attention now. And everybody, again, now starting this month, July, in the newspapers we cannot go on like that. How can you water your garden without watering so much? And so it's really, all of a sudden, it has become a topic in Germany for Germany.
Right. And not so long ago, you had extreme flooding in parts of Germany with fatalities in Northwest Germany. And so I think it just emphasizes the increasing extremes that we're experiencing, floods and droughts. And you mentioned that Germany is a humid country, and so you're not accustomed to droughts. And then maybe our data in the past, when we looked at droughts in West Texas and stuff, they're always used to droughts. They never have much water. But for humid regions that are accustomed to having a lot of water, it's maybe more challenging. Are you seeing any impacts on energy production or cooling for thermoelectric power? Or?
Yeah, in the extreme, particularly in 2003, that was a big thing because there were still more power plants with one-through cooling instead of cooling towers. Now I think it could still be a little of a problem, but I mean, those power plants don't need so much water anymore because they're all cooling towers now. So it's more the transport on the Rhine and the other rivers that are for shipping. And it is more really the forests and of course also agriculture. Yeah.
So you're very well known internationally for your global hydrologic model, the WaterGAP model, and last year you celebrated the 25th anniversary of the model, which is great. Maybe you can describe a little bit how that that work began, and how you became involved in it, and maybe a little bit about how it works.
Yeah. So WaterGAP is a global model for, on the one hand, water resources. So how much water is provided by, so to say, precipitation minus evapotranspiration. But then always from the beginning, it was also a model of human water use. So from the very beginning, it was there to say something about water scarcity or water stress, in particularly under the impact of not only global climate change, but in general global change. So that was the idea that came from Professor Joel Camo. Professor Joel Camo is somebody who worked before at IASA, this very international systems analysis institute in Vienna, and later he was heading the development of the image model, which is an integrated assessment model. And then he got a professorship at the University of Kassel and was looking for what is called wissenschaftliche Assistentin, which is sort of an assistant professor, but you have a boss, let's say. So it's a postdoc position for 6 years or 7 years. And he was looking very broadly to do something at the global scale, so maybe atmospheric modeling or oceans, or he said water. And when I saw this in the position, in the job description, I thought, oh, okay, let's apply. And I think because I got the job, that's why then Joe thought that the best choice is to develop a global hydrologic model, because in this integrated assessment model of RIVM in the Netherlands, this image model, water was not in there, and was very clear that, I mean, if you want to see how the global, let's say, emissions and climate and everything and land cover is developing, I mean, you need to have water on the continents in the system. But that was not the goal, to integrate it into image, but just to have a standalone water resources and water use model. And I started working there in 1996. And it was really possible to do that because of the connection that Joe had to the former colleagues, for example, regarding climate input. Now, at that time, just having global scale information on precipitation and temperature, I mean, that was not around, but people at, well, also in UK, but I mean, that was the connection. I mean, it was his idea, and also his knowledge about how to do global scale work was the initial beginning, so to say. But then, because I was a water person, I mean, I brought in let's say, the hydrological knowledge and also modeling, because I came from groundwater modeling, then I did modeling in the unsaturated zone. And so, I mean, so to say, came then to the global scale to bring that all together. But also what I found really interesting was also the water use modeling. So, for example, we also then talked to a water economist, and he actually joined me on a trip to Brazil. So I learned a lot on water economy. No,
right. So. And I mean, so you mentioned that WaterGAP was developed partially to address water scarcity concerns. And it basically, I guess, would you describe it as a water budget model? You look at the inputs and the outputs and then evaluate change in storage. A lot of the other types of global models at that time maybe were developed by climate scientists, and they were using them for the lower boundary condition for their climate models. And they were maybe more physically based, but they didn't have that human water use component. And so that was a unique aspect of WaterGAP, was bringing in the water use. So that was critical.
Definitely. for example, when we then thought, okay, irrigation, outside of Germany at least, this is a major water user. I thought, okay, we go to FAO, because FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, is in charge of irrigation, because that's when you look at their websites and so on. They should have information on irrigation worldwide. Well, turns out, well, they had some country values for that, estimates of country values, but that, of course, if you look from it from a hydrological perspective, this is just what we didn't want to see. We did no longer want to see like one water scarcity value, so water use over water resources for China or for the US. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So our goal was in the beginning to go for river basins or drainage basins and to make assessments at that scale. And so FAO didn't have those maps of irrigated areas available. And also, I mean, when you looked at the literature, there were some publications where people have drawn some polygons on maps and said, well, this is the irrigated area. So, I mean, the water use part was really not well covered at all at that time. And I think we were very lucky that we had actually at that time a student, not a PhD student, but really a master student, Stefan Siebert, who is also now a professor, that he was working with me as a student assistant. And then we decided to go to FAO and ask them if we could, let's say, in cooperation with them, of course, work on such a map of irrigated areas or areas equipped for irrigation. And they agreed, and Stefan stayed there and went to their, so to say, in their cellars and went through all the folders they had from their experts from the different countries who once in a while sent in reports on new irrigation projects. And that's how Stefan, in the end, I mean, together with me, but it was mainly his work, how we came up with this first map of areas equipped for irrigation, which then allowed to do then now what modelers do. Now you think, okay, now I have the area. Well, what approach can I take to estimate the irrigation water demand, which is, I mean, there's many approaches, and we just took always simple ones, or, I mean, in that case, tried out a more complex one and compared it to the simple one, and then decided for the simple one. But only with these geographic data, so to say. Now I'm in the geography department, I wasn't before. Without these geographic data, you can't go anywhere. And I think that also is something, but in the beginning of WaterGAP, we put a lot of effort in creating data sets that at that point in time were not available anywhere else. So
yeah. And I think, you know, your work with Stefan, I mean, is well known internationally. And I mean, I think you guys were the first to point out that irrigated agriculture was responsible for about 70% of global water consumption and 90% of global water withdrawal.
The other way around.
Sorry, 70% of water withdrawal and 90% of water consumption. And so, so that is extremely important, because the elephant in the room then is irrigation. And that links water use and water scarcity issues to food production globally. And so that was extremely important to have the spatial coverage and then understand the importance of irrigated agriculture. So some people talk about, you know, turning off the faucet when they brush their teeth and things like that to conserve water. But I mean, maybe what they're eating might be much more important, considering water footprints and stuff. So it's great to have this global picture then with these global models, and the UN relies heavily on these data, looking at water issues globally. I think another aspect of WaterGAP that may be a little bit unique is that you calibrated, minimally calibrated global WaterGAP to streamflow data. Maybe you can describe that a little bit, Petra.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as I said, I mean, the major focus in the beginning was to come up with water stress indicators, more or less water demand or water use divided by water resources. So then when you see how do you compute water resources? I mean, they're strongly a function of input data, of precipitation input data. And of course, at a global scale, at least in places outside of, let's say, Central Europe and United States, let's say, the number of gauging stations is very low for each, let's say, half-degree grid scale. What is the spatial resolution of WaterGAP? And in the very beginning, for example, the Global Precipitation Climatology Center, they didn't want to come up with half-degree data sets, because they said, no, from a meteorologist point of view, we do not have enough gauging stations per half-degree grid cell to say anything robust. Okay, so very obviously, I mean, in some areas of the globe, you didn't have the slightest idea how much precipitation was falling, like in the upper Amazon or in the Himalayas. Now, when you think about all these big rivers that come out of the Himalayas, so what do you know about precipitation in Himalaya? So I think it was very, and then in the beginning, I always thought, oh, only precipitation is the uncertain thing. And then when for the first time, we could get our hands on a second data set on radiation information, so that we need to compute for global radiation that or shortwave radiation, that we need to compute net radiation for potentially evapotranspiration. When I got my hands on a different data set from the ones that we have always used, I saw what a huge impact it is, the uncertainty of the radiation data. No, so everything that happens in terrestrial hydrology is so much dependent on input of climate values. And then, of course, we have all these other things that we don't know what happened on Earth and what are the parameters and so on. So, and it was very clear that whatever we would compute can be very much off, even long-term averages. And so I think that's why from the very beginning, we did this very coarse, basin-specific calibration of the model in a way that we just force the model to simulate. Now it's plus minus 10% of the observed long-term annual mean stream flow. We just forced it so that at least from a ballpark value, you can say something about a water stress. Because when you look at other models that are not calibrated, particularly in more semi-arid areas where you have water use and so on, I mean, they can be off by a factor of whatever, 5 or so. Or maybe that's a lot, but a factor of 2, and that's still a factor of 2 makes, I mean, a lot of a difference than when you try to compute a water stress indicator. And that's why we went for this very simple calibration target, or also, process. And we didn't want to do the very normal way hydrologists calibrate. They have a model, they have daily stream flow time series, and then they calibrate 8 or 15 or whatever parameters. Because what we learned from Keith Bevan's equifinality idea, that, I mean, if we given that the input, the climate model, not climate model, the climate observations, or even our model, but climate observations is so uncertain, and then you put all the uncertainty in the parameters, and then anyway we have complex model, that we always felt this is not the right way to go. Just do it simple way. Right. However, now we have started, a long time ago already, we have a large German research project with geodesists also, where we now do try to calibrate more than, let's say, 1 or 2 parameters in WaterGAP, and try to calibrate against monthly time series, because we want to calibrate at the same time, not only against stream flow, but also against total water storage anomaly. And then also we started with snow cover extent. So that you have just other multivariable calibration approach. Right. And so the early approaches to water scarcity index, like Falcon Mark and those early works, you mentioned, you have the supply and demand, and then to estimate scarcity, divide by the resource. And so what do you consider the resource? So Falcon Mark's early work considered surface water only. And WaterGAP considers surface water and groundwater. And so can you describe a little bit how you evaluate these resources? Okay, so I told you that I'm a geologist who comes from the groundwater. So in global hydrological modeling, I always had a special interest in groundwater. So like around the year 2005, I think, we wanted to come up with a reasonable estimate of groundwater recharge so that we can say something about renewable groundwater resources as the long-term average of groundwater recharge. So groundwater recharge from soil, just that. And we used, or we are still using what we call heuristic approach, where we say, okay, we compute, let's say, total runoff, and then we know as hydrologists, we know if the relief is steep, if the soil is not coarse, but it's a clay, and also, of course, if you have a permafrost and so on. So from these spatial characteristics, physiogeographic characteristics, we just model, so to say, a fraction of the total runoff to go into the groundwater, and the rest go quickly to, fast surface and subsurface flow. And then also what we then saw was, okay, then if you do it like that, you would overestimate groundwater recharge in areas with really heavy rain fall, like in India. Now, if you have just a fraction of that temporary constant fraction, that wouldn't work. So we say, okay, we assume a maximum infiltration rate, so to say. And then I had the chance to get my hands on a few values of chloride mass balance groundwater recharge estimates, and then we sort of say tuned our model a little bit to that. And so with that, then we know how much, more or less, we estimate how much groundwater recharge is. And then in our model, like in all other models, I would say almost all global hydrology models, it's just that then we have a base flow out of the system into surface water bodies, so lakes, wetlands, and rivers, which is just a linear outflow. So the groundwater volume times an outflow coefficient.
Right.
So that's how we connect.
Right. And since you mentioned earlier, irrigation is the elephant in the room, it's responsible for most of the water use, then how do you partition that water use then to surface water and groundwater? I would think that's a very important part of WaterGAP.
Yeah, that is based again on the work of Stefan Siebert, who looked at, so to say, again, data from FAO to say, to estimate for, I think, 16,000 spatial units worldwide, what is the fraction of groundwater supply versus surface water supply. So we base that totally on his work. So
if surface water is available, then you would assume that the irrigation is sourced by surface water?
No. We have really, per those areas, a constant fraction. So also something that does not change over time. So I think this idea, other modelers have this idea that they see as long as surface water is there, then surface water is used. But I don't think that fits reality, because farmers have groundwater wells and they will use the wells. No, why would you buy a groundwater well and build a groundwater well with a lot of money and then not use it? So the situation, at least in many places, will be like that. I know in the Central Valley, United States, that's not the case. There, people are so well equipped, they can use either the one or the other. But we decided against that, but went for that, a constant fraction.
And how did you come up with the constant fraction?
That is based on these, when you look at the FAO, so to say, FAO reports from their local experts. So FAO gets regular reports from local experts, country experts, who are paid to give a current situation of irrigation in Brazil or Argentina or whatever. And they provide such sort of information. If those irrigation area is, let's say, mainly from groundwater or mainly from irrigation.
Right. I agree with you that most places, they cannot afford to maintain both systems like surface water or groundwater, or we saw a transition in India from canal irrigation to groundwater. It's usually people mainly operate just one system and usually cannot afford to maintain both. Mm-hmm. So when you model irrigation water use from groundwater, and then you can see over time, then, there's a cone of depression that forms around these wells, and then you can capture some surface water. And Lenny Konikow suggests from his US work and also globally that 85% of the groundwater that's pumped eventually comes from capture of surface water or reduced evapotranspiration. And I think, you know, another global model suggests that when they run with and without capture, they get similar estimates. About 85% globally of the groundwater that's pumped is coming from capture. I was just wondering, do you see similar things with WaterGAP?
Yeah, we actually have never analyzed global numbers like that. And I was wondering also, I mean, what do we do here? Because we do not have a model different from the idea that has a capture zone or a cone of depression, because we do not have a gradient-based groundwater model. So our groundwater is like a box; it just flows in and out. However, I think that what we cannot do is we cannot model if there is a change from the groundwater losing to the surface water or back. And that is why we also work on a gradient-based groundwater model like WB has with Inge de Graaf, but it's really difficult to get it run. So we don't currently, it doesn't work. We have a steady state version by Robert Reinecke, but really to couple it with WaterGAP, we're still struggling. Yeah, but anyway, with our model, what happens in our model is, as I said, we get into the box, we get the groundwater recharge, and then out of the box, we take groundwater abstractions, net groundwater abstraction, so groundwater abstraction minus return flow. And then, of course, that impacts the storage. And though if we have a lot of groundwater abstraction, the storage goes down, and though does the outflow to the surface water go down. So we do have also a strong impact the outflow, the groundwater discharge to the surface water body decreases as we increase the net abstraction from the ground. So we also simulate that, but not in the sense that there is a cone of depression. And also what we cannot simulate is that evapotranspiration changes, because we have nothing like capillary rise or things like that. So that is not covered. But actually I had a paper together with Claudia Herbert on groundwater stress indicators in 2019. And there we proposed 3 new indicators of groundwater stress. And one of them was, what is the outflow to surface water bodies like rivers in a naturalized system without groundwater withdrawals and with groundwater withdrawals as a measure for groundwater stress, or rather the stress that groundwater abstractions put on the river ecosystems. So it is modeled, but not so physically or cone of depression.
Right. So that's really nice to point that out. I mean, we need, models to develop projections of the future, but also to test the different hypotheses and to evaluate different processes, and then to see when we synthesize and integrate all of the different inputs and outputs, does it match reality? And I think that's why modeling is essential for all of those reasons. But also you mentioned, when you simulate inputs and outputs, then you get change in storage, and you have been working with geodesists and comparing WaterGAP with GRACE satellite data on terrestrial or total water storage, which is from the land surface to the MOHO. And so you work closely, and of course the German Space Agency developed developed GRACE with NASA, and so that's a great collaboration between the two countries. So from early on, you've been doing these comparisons with GRACE and using GRACE in different ways. Maybe you can describe that a little bit, Petra.
Yeah. The only thing that I might correct, it's not the European or German Space Agency, but it's the Geoforschungszentrum that is handling GRACE, this a different organization, so to say. But anyway, it was, for me, when I learned about GRACE and what it can measure, it was really a big surprise for me, because I had never thought that gravity would be meaningful. As a geologist, I knew gravity as a static gravity field tells you what happens in the Himalayas, where you have the crust and so on. But then all of a sudden, the geodesists were able to measure the monthly changing field. So how the field changes from month to month. And over the continents. I mean, I think I never thought about it before. That is mostly related to the change in water storage. And then for a global modeler, I mean, that was wonderful because, I mean, they have such a big footprint, like 200,000 square kilometers or maybe 100,000 square kilometers. I mean, then everybody always complains about that we have half-degree grid scales, 2,500 square kilometers. Oh, that's so big, particularly when you look in Europe. But then when you compare it to the GRACE footprint, I mean, we have a higher resolution. And that's why then also that was very interesting for those geodesists in the beginning to get our computation of total water storage anomaly, for example, to check de-aliasing, because we have daily changing total water storage, but then they only have monthly things, and then they can, I couldn't do that, but they can evaluate if those daily changes have an impact on their, let's say, signal or their processing. So I think that was the first contact. So more like they needed our data to get their processing right, or just assess what they get from uncertainty. But then very early, we worked with the geodesists who were able to do the processing of these GRACE data. And I think actually since 2005, we worked with them. And this project that I told you where we try to calibrate WaterGAP, that's also with geodesists who know about GRACE. And so GRACE is really great for global hydrological modeling, but it's also a difficult data set and observation in inverted commas. And I think it has been a struggle, but I mean, I really like interdisciplinary work, and I get a lot of fun out of understanding what other people say, because everybody has their own way of putting things, and geodesists are very good in math, so they have all these spherical harmonics, blah, 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 that for me is hard to understand, but it's fun to do that. But up to now, I would say that GRACE results are very difficult to use because leakage problem, for example, when you ask geodesists about leakage, they throw up the hand. They say, okay, we don't know really what it is and how to estimate it, no? Because we are in the situation now where we would like to know, okay, if we take such a piece of land, such a part of a basin, and then we add up all the, I mean, geodesists provide, of course, at a half-degree resolution or for mass cons, and so they provide something. But then you look at different solutions and they look quite different. And then none of them really includes the leakage error. When you look at people when you talk to geodesists who do spherical harmonics, they say mass cons, forget about it. That's just fake. And then we're like, but tell me, I'm the hydrologist, so what should I do? And I can tell you that up to now, I have not talked to any geodesist who told me, use this to calibrate your model or you to really know. So I think it gives you, of course, very interesting insight. But to say, okay, this is the truth, or even this is the truth with the uncertainty bounds they provide. These uncertainty bounds they provide, they're not the real uncertainties at all. So that they will say, but then how to come up with the real uncertainty bounds of that measurement is, I would say, rather impossible. And I think too much like, I mean, like, for example, trends, for example, GRACE people or people who interested in GRACE, they're really often interested in trends. But we also saw in our work with geodesists how dependent trends are on how you do the filtering, the leakage correction, everything. Trends are so sensitive to the slightest change. I mean, not only in the time series that you use anyway, but also in the way how these things are processed.
Right.
And, I think we have to be very careful with believing in that sense, those values per se.
Right. Well, I think, you raised some important points. GRACE, I mean, as Jay Femieti said, GRACE gets the big picture. And so if you're looking at a basin like the Amazon, that's 6 million square kilometers, I mean, I think that's the strength of GRACE. And then we have several different processing centers in Germany and the US and other regions. And so, and each of them are using different processing approaches. And then when they get similar results. So we did a comparison several years ago, comparing the output from the global models with GRACE data, and saw a lot of variability between the two and then within the models. And so I think it's important. And I know you mentioned earlier, you're looking at snow data, you're looking at GRACE, and you're looking at all different types of data to try to constrain your models. And I think the intersectoral impact model intercomparison project that now compares a lot of different models, that's excellent. And then now all of these models calculate the terrestrial total water storage to compare directly with GRACE. And so I think that's very good also. So I think the more we use as many different data sources as we can and do more comparisons, then I think it will increase our confidence and maybe help us estimate uncertainties more. But I think, when people talk about, global contribution to sea level rise or things like that, I think GRACE is a stronger tool for that sort of thing than models, because it is a big picture. So
I totally agree, but maybe I can tell you about a project we had that was it was called Closing the Sea Level Budget, financed by the European Space Agency and led by a geodesist, Martin Horvath from Dresden. And there the goal was that on the one hand, people measure the sea level, and so the steric component from the heat, and then to close, so to say, the sea level budget in the sense that where does what GRACE sees over the ocean, where does it come from? From Antarctica, from Greenland melting, from the glaciers on the land, and from the land water, which the rest what we model. And I think the nice thing, for me, very surprising, was that when we add up our 60,000 grid cells, where we put in the climate, we have all these information on the soil and so on, and from that we get, and of course water use, and from that we get total water storage anomaly, averaged over all land areas except Antarctica and Greenland. And in this paper by Cáceres et al. 2021, we see that amazingly, I was prepared for everything. I thought, well, it can be just everything, but that it fits so nicely. So I think it's more like it depends a lot of your climate input, and it just must be an averaging out of errors. But it's really amazing that we have almost no phase shift. So really every year goes down. We also see 2016 we went down, and now we see we go up again. And I was so surprised to see that you bring in like this one big, I mean, not big, of course, GRACE is also averaged in, but we have so many steps in between. We model what happens in the soil, in the groundwater, in the lakes, blah, blah, blah. And then often when you average everything up, it amazingly fits and shows trends, and the seasonality is fine. Because, I mean, I thought the seasonality can be totally off. Why should it be the right one? But it is.
Right. I think when we compared seasonality, we found that the amplitude from GRACE was higher, but
it is. But in sometimes it seems lower. But when you average over the whole land area, I mean, in your paper, you saw it perfectly that we do not do a good job at the basin scale, but globally, it all averages out to very beautiful fit of GRACE with our model.
Right. Well, we saw the opposite effect with GRACE and the models, but that was earlier on. So I'm sure they have improved with more of these model intercomparisons and stuff. So I would like to shift a little bit to your socio-hydrology aspects and your participatory methodologies to integrate knowledge and then communicate with stakeholders and try to parlay what you are developing then to these stakeholders to help them with decision making and policies. Yeah. Maybe you can describe some of that, Petra.
Yeah. So actually, I entered that field of research when I had a project in northeastern Brazil on how impacts of climate change in northeastern Brazil could affect agricultural production, water use, water resources, but also migration. It was a large project of, let's say, 10 German universities and Brazilian universities. And we came up with two, let's say, integrated models at two different scales for two federal states in the dry northeast of Brazil, and then also for one small county, let's say. And then we put in all our scientific knowledge, including a little bit also of social knowledge on migration and economics and agriculture and so on. And then we try to do scenarios of the future. And all of that was, in a way, I was wondering, we put so much work on what we think the reality is from the perspective of us researchers. But when you go as a European or a German to Brazil, you notice that really you do not know what is in people's heads, who then later make the decisions, no? Because they have just a different way of looking at things, how to keep data, what is important, and so on. So, but on the other hand, in Brazil, they had a very, let's say, good regulation of water resources, that they had these basin committees already 20 years ago, where then they decided at the end of the wet season how much water we will give to what user. So they had these basin committees. And at that time, I thought, well, now that we have come up with these integrated models, maybe we should think about what people have in their heads. So why put so much work on what we as scientists think is the reality as a system, but we never look at what people really think, what perspective they have, which can be very different from what is in our scientific or my scientific head. So, well, unfortunately, we didn't get that funded, but then later, when I then came to Frankfurt, I had the opportunity to work with social ecological people and didn't want to do hydrology there, but what I started was that based also on the work of a computer scientist from the Netherlands, who had what is called a dynamic actor network modeling thing, that what we did was we started before bringing people together in workshops, ask them what is their problem perspective. So what is your goal? What are the factors that impact the goals? What activities of what actors could impact the factors? What are external impacts? And everything you could do at a semi-quantitative scale of 1 to 7, so to say. But actually the semi-quantitative thing was not the important one. The important is that from each stakeholder, so representative, let's say, from an NGO, from the company who produces a chemical, from the water administration, you get, for the problem field of interest, you get such a problem perspective of the stakeholder. And that helps a lot. We have made, I mean, we always do that now. That helps to understand what people know, but also what they do not know, and how they relate things. So what is their systems perspective, and what are their goals, of course, also. And then in these participatory processes, let's say in the first workshop, people can then, or these stakeholder representatives can present themselves with this with this map, let's say, or with this graph. We call them perception graphs. So that to avoid that after you had 3 or 4 or 5 workshops, after 2 years, then one stakeholder says to the other, if I had known that you did not know that, or you thought that, then we could have talked right from the beginning. No? So that was the beginning of that to say, okay, if we want to have a positive impact on, let's say, the development of sustainable solutions, then we have to take it as seriously what is in people's minds, those who have then to make the decisions or implement some strategies, as it is to come up with a good systems perspective of reality. And I mean the natural sciences, but also the social reality, so to say. So these are 2 different things, like what we think scientific view, but then bring that together with the stakeholder view. And that was the beginning of, let's say, finding other methods to bring together stakeholder knowledge of practitioners, non-academic practitioners who are in the field, so to say, and scientists who are far away from the specific problem, but have a general knowledge and a systems idea and have the time because they are financed in a project.
Right. And oftentimes, of course, most of the time, we neglect the social aspects. But I mean, many times when we're looking at issues like drought or things like that, maybe some of the solutions may not be technical. It may be more social solutions. And so when you have this more comprehensive approach, then incorporating the stakeholders much more integrally into the process, then you're more likely to come up with solutions. And then co-design, I guess, is one of the terms that they use these days. So if you bring them in early on, then, you know, they're part of the entire process. And so they're much more likely to take the results from those analysis and apply them. Maybe you can describe a little bit, I know you've done quite a bit of work on risk management and, you know, the hazards and things like that. Maybe you can describe a little bit on one example of doing this type of thing and some of the methodologies that you felt were successful.
Yeah. So when you use the term risk, I think this is a very nice term that was more or less coined in the 5th IPCC assessment report, or maybe a little bit before, as a very good way to bring together the knowledge of social scientists and the knowledge of the physical scientists, because the hazard is mostly on the side of the physical scientists. No, let's say drought, less water than normal. But then the risk comes only if people are vulnerable, or to the degree that people are vulnerable. So when you talk about risk and risk management, I think for natural scientists or hydrologists like us, it's a very good idea if you can work together with, let's say, social scientists or sociologists. And I had the chance in 2016 to do a sabbatical at NCAR in Boulder, where I could work with a sociologist there, one of the very few, next to thousands, of climatologists and hydrologists, with Patricia Romero Lancao, who also, like me before, was working in the IPCC assessment report. And she's a sociologist, and her focus is on vulnerability. So we worked together there in my sabbatical to come up with a roadmap, so to say, how to set up participatory risk management processes, taking into account uncertainty. So that's also something I find very important, particularly with climate change, of course, but not only, to really include uncertainty in decision-making in a very, upfront way. So embracing uncertainty, that's how we also call that. So, and the difficult thing is, so to say, that people embrace it in the sense that, particularly with climate change, people might say, oh, if we say, oh, we know so little and everything is so uncertain, well, then we don't do anything. No, of course, that's the balance. You have to do it in the right way. So you have to get people used to and stakeholders used to embracing uncertainty in the sense that they use information, estimates on uncertainty in their decision making. So that is something that in two current projects, we work on how to translate multimodal ensemble output for stakeholders so that they can decide, depending on how risk averse they are or not, on what futures they would like to adapt to. Because it's still often shown, particularly, of course, if you show maps, then the median of an ensemble is shown. And then, for example, in Germany, when you look at long-term average, let's say, precipitation, or even water sources, but let's say precipitation in Germany, it will not change much in the future. People know in the meantime, yes, in the summer less, in the winter no, but anyway, in the median, the models, the ensembles come up with more or less zero change. But then when you look at the range of models, then you will have some models who have 20% less and others have 20% more. And who can say which is the right one? I mean, with climate change, I think you cannot say that the median is a more robust estimate than any other model. So in general, with climate models, they say each model has the same likelihood. Nobody really can say this is a better model that will have a more likely thing. So at least climatologists don't say that. And I think for global hydrological models, it's the same thing. When we then use climate input into hydrological models, all hydrological models, they have different, even if my hydrological model does a better job for the current condition, it doesn't mean that they can do a better job for the translation of climate change into water. So anyway, so the uncertainty is in these future pathways, I think is one of my foci when we look at how to interact with stakeholders. And then the other thing is, as I said, is bringing in the perspectives of the stakeholders. And now in a project on adaptation to climate change in the water resources in a biosphere reserve in Germany. I also have again the chance to work with fortunately with a sociologist. And this sociologist, she is not into vulnerability, that's not there the case, but she is about why people transform or not. And of course, she uses also these methodologies that like focus groups, and they do surveys for the public and so on. So methods that they can do well, but also theoretically, for example, in that process, in that participatory process, we work from the social sciences side with it's a cultural theory of perspectives. So distinguishing, now I don't know how it's called in English, like you distinguish fatalists and hierarchists and egalitarians and libertarians or liberals, I don't know. So these groups of people, and the idea is to come up with strategies, with measures that relate to all of them, not fatalists, that doesn't work, but the others. So we say that a multiple view strategy, also a harmonious multi-view. So this is what we take from the sociologists in that project and try to include it then in our Bayesian networks that are more now, I mean, that's like, I'm a modeler, so I always model, I like that. And instead of having long lines of text, I rather have a picture of graph with some boxes, no, that's why. So, I mean, that my experience is that, I mean, ideally, you can work in, let's say, small teams with social scientists for this work, but all the other projects I've done it just, I mean, with my own group, and just trying to read on more social ecological things, and just so say do it myself. And yeah,
Right. I think I think that's extremely important, and I think we're becoming more and more aware of it these days. I mean, I've been doing some work on public water systems and vulnerability. So, I mean, if you have a water quality issue, you need to have a water quality issue first. That's the hazard. You know, so it could be arsenic contamination or things like that. And then you have the vulnerability of the population. Can they deal with the problem? And then you have the exposure to that. So there are many different facets to it, but I think it's important to consider all of these together then to evaluate how to address the problem and try to provide better quality of water for people. So this risk management is very important, and then communicating uncertainty is a huge aspect, and I really enjoyed some of your papers on that issue. And as you mentioned, you know, the mean may not change, but I think another aspect is adapting to extremes. You know, you have drought now, seasonal drought in the summer in Germany, and because you're a humid climate, you may not have much storage. Or I know I come from Ireland, and you know, they're a humid climate, they're used to rain all the time, you know, and if they have 2 months without rain, they're in deep doo-doo, you know, because they don't have the storage. So these are all different aspects. So adapting to extremes, or the World Bank saying too much, too little, and too polluted. So we have to adapt to these extremes. So our guest today is Petra Döll. She's a professor of hydrology at Goethe University in Frankfurt, and she works on global modeling and also stakeholder engagement and the participatory processes to translate the science to decision-making and policies. And we've talked about her WaterGAP model and then her approaches to working with stakeholders. Thank you so much, Petra, for joining me today and sharing your thoughts on these issues.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my views. See you.